Have you ever worn a dress so complicated, so restrictive, that the idea of going to the bathroom seemed like a mission from a spy novel? Now imagine that dress isn't for a party. It's for every single day of your life. In the 1800s, women weren't just expected to be elegant, they were expected to suffer for it. Beneath the lace, the ribbons, and the floral perfume was a truth nobody talked about. Every woman still had to pee. And not just pee, but menstruate, relieve herself, clean herself all, while trapped in a fabric prison of modesty and social rules. This isn't just about fashion or history, it's about how half the population found ways to deal with their most basic needs, while the world around them pretended those needs didn't exist. So today, we're lifting the layers, literally and metaphorically. We're diving into the strange, secret, clever, and sometimes outright hilarious world of Victorian women's toilet routines. Let's begin where it all starts. With the clothes. To understand the struggle, we first have to look at what women actually wore. Victorian fashion wasn't simply about beauty, it was a carefully constructed symbol of morality, femininity, and class. And that construction came with many layers. Here's the average wardrobe of a respectable woman in, say, 1850. The chemise, a loose, long shirt made of linen or cotton, worn closest to the skin to absorb sweat and protect other garments. Drawers loose, knee-length underpants, often split at the crotch. Yes, we'll get to that. The corset laced tightly to shape the body into an hourglass figure. A tight corset could reduce the waist by inches, compress organs, and limit movement. A corset cover, a light garment worn over the corset to smooth the silhouette. One or more petticoats, to build volume under the skirt and keep warm. Or hoop skirt made of steel or whalebone, designed to hold the outer skirt wide and round. An overskirt or dress. The visible, fashionable layer made of silk, taffeta, or wool. Bustle pads, undersleeves, gloves, stockings, garters, and don't forget the hat, boots, and sometimes a cloak or shawl. All this could weigh 20 to 40 pounds and take over 30 minutes to put on or take off. So, if you needed to use the bathroom, the question wasn't, where's the toilet? It was, how do I get through all this in time? The answer was both practical and pretty shocking. Before we talk toilets, let's talk about the thing that wrapped around every Victorian woman's torso, like a second ribcage, the corset. To the modern eye, corsets seem romantic, even glamorous, but to the women who actually wore them, corsets were both a social requirement and a physical punishment. Now, the corset wasn't just a fashion accessory, it was a non-negotiable uniform. From young teens to aging widows, women were expected to wear a corset every single day. Not wearing one, that was scandalous. It meant you were either sick, scandalous, or sinful. But here's what people don't realize. A corset didn't just shape your waist. It compressed your stomach, squeezed your lungs, and most importantly for our topic, put relentless pressure on your bladder. Let's imagine the scene. You've just finished your morning tea, maybe even some warm milk or broth. You feel the urge to relieve yourself, but there's a problem. Your corset has been laced tightly since dawn. It's pinning your organs in place, pushing everything downward. Even if you want to hold it, your bladder can't expand fully under that pressure. So what do? Option 1. Undo your corset, but that's not realistic. Most women couldn't remove their corset without help, and unlacing it in front of anyone other than a trusted maid was deeply improper. Option 2. Grin and bear it. Many women did. They trained their bodies to hold in discomfort, to ignore pain, to stay composed. But sometimes, that didn't work. And here's where the real challenge came in. Using the toilet while still wearing the corset. How do you bend? You don't. How do you squat? Barely. Most women had to find a posture, awkward half-sitting knees, angled, corset creaking, and hope for the best. Doctors in the Victorian era were well aware of this. Many warned that corsets caused digestive trouble, fainting, kidney issues, and urinary retention. But fashion was more powerful than health. The irony: men wrote the rules. Women bore the bladder pain. Some women rebelled quietly. They loosened their laces at home. Others joined the rational dress movement, advocating for looser clothing and corset-free fashion. But these rebels were ridiculed as unfeminine. So, in most cases, the corset stayed on, and women found other ways, ingenious, strange, sometimes desperate ways to do what all humans must do. But their struggle didn't end with the corset. Next came the problem of location. Let's talk about something we take for granted today: finding a toilet when we're out in public. In the modern world, bathrooms are everywhere. Coffee shops, gas stations, parks, airports. Even if they're sometimes gross, they're at least there. But in the Victorian era, public toilets for women were almost non-existent. In fact, the very idea that a woman might need to relieve herself in public was considered improper, even shameful. City planners and public officials almost entirely male-built facilities for men, public urinals, called pissoirs in Paris, or gentlemen's conveniences in London. But women, they were expected to stay at home. If she was out shopping or visiting a friend and felt the need to go, tough luck. For a long time, even the idea of public toilets for women was controversial. There were debates in newspapers. Should decent women have places to relieve themselves, or is that too indecent to even suggest? Some argued that providing toilets for women would encourage them to loiter in public spaces. Others feared it would make women less modest. Can you imagine? A woman acknowledging that she has a bladder. How scandalous. As a result, women adapted. Wealthy women avoided drinking too much before going out. Others strategically planned their errands around the homes of trusted friends, where they might politely excuse themselves. Some carried portable options and, we'll get to those in a minute, but even in emergencies, options were bleak. In the 1850s, a movement began called the Ladies' Sanitary Association, which pushed for better hygiene and public toilet access. Their campaigns helped bring about the first public women's restrooms in cities like London, but these were few and far between, and often hidden from view. They didn't want the sight of a lady's convenience to offend passersby. That sink in, not the odor. Just the sight of a women's toilet was considered unseemly. For working-class women, things were worse. Factory shifts were long, breaks were rare. In many cases, women had to relieve themselves in outdoor alleys, behind buildings, or in communal outhouses with no locks. And yet, society still expected them to appear clean, feminine, and untouched by vulgar bodily needs. One author of the time wrote, "The ideal woman is like a rose, lovely, silent, and without such earthly troubles as digestion." The irony, women's bodies were breaking down from these earthly troubles, and they were enduring it all in silence. But women are resilient. Denied access, they got creative. Which brings us to one of the most ingenious adaptations in silk skirts and tucked beneath lace petticoats. At first glance, the crinoline looks like one of history's silliest fashion trends, a huge, dome-shaped structure made of steel or horsehair, worn under a skirt to give it volume. Why anyone wear that? The truth? The crinoline was both a symbol of beauty and a secret weapon for survival, including in the bathroom. Let's start with what it was. A crinoline wasn't just a skirt, it was a cage, literally, a metal framework that widened the lower half of a woman's body, making her appear delicate and doll-like. It held the dress far away from the body, allowing air to circulate. In summer, it was a relief. In winter, it was a wind trap. And yes, it made everyday life incredibly awkward. Women couldn't sit easily. They couldn't walk through narrow doors. Two women in crinolines couldn't pass each other in a hallway. But here's where it gets interesting, because the crinoline created a hollow space beneath the skirt. It also offered something unexpected: room to go to the bathroom without removing any clothing. Think about it. Earlier, women wore layers of heavy wool or cotton, which they had to hike up awkwardly when squatting or using a chamber pot. But with the crinoline, all that fabric was suspended around them like a tent, and underneath, open crotch drawers. Yes, we're going there. Victorian undergarments were often split at the bottom. Why? Because taking off all those layers wasn't practical. So, when nature called, a woman could find a private corner, lift her skirt slightly, crouch just a bit and use a pot or a device without removing anything at all. The crinoline made that possible. In fact, some women even used their crinoline as cover while going in public places. It wasn't ideal, but it was fast, discreet, and it worked. Of course, this came with problems. Sometimes the skirt would tip, or the woman would misalign herself, and let's not forget, these garments were flammable. There are true horrifying stories of women whose skirts caught fire from candles or fireplaces while they tried to relieve themselves. In one documented case, a young woman's crinoline ignited in her bedroom while she bent over a chamber pot. By the time help came, the fire had spread. She died of burns the next day. So yes, the crinoline gave some convenience, but also great risk. By the 1870s, the crinoline fell out of fashion. It was replaced by the bustle, which pushed the fabric toward the back instead of all around. But for 2 or 3 decades, it had been a game-changer, a ridiculous, cage-like skirt that gave women a little more freedom to pee. Freedom, of course, was a relative term, because even with the crinoline's help, women still had to be cautious, clever, and quick. And that brings us to the next tool in their secret arsenal, a mysterious object, elegant in design, and often mistaken for a gravy boat. Now what if you couldn't make it home in time? What if there were no chamber pots nearby, no bushes to crouch behind, no private corner? Enter one of the most brilliant and bizarre inventions of the Victorian era, the bourdaloue. At first glance, you might mistake it for a fine porcelain dish, elegant, curved, sometimes gold-rimmed, delicately painted with flowers or swirls. A perfect addition to a tea set, or so it would seem. But the bourdaloue was no teacup. It was a portable urinal designed specifically for women, named, some say, after the French priest, Louis Bourdaloue, whose sermons were so long that ladies needed a way to relieve themselves discreetly. The bourdaloue was a small, oval-shaped container that fit snugly between a woman's legs, and thanks to open crotch drawers, she didn't need to undress. She would simply slip it underneath her skirt, position it carefully, very carefully, and relieve herself, sometimes while seated, sometimes crouching, then hand it off quietly to a maid or discreetly empty it herself. It was the quiet revolution beneath the crinoline. Some were made of porcelain, others of pewter or even leather. Rich women had their initials engraved. Servants were taught how to clean them properly, without causing embarrassment. And yes, it was small enough to be carried in a handbag, or hidden under skirts. Imagine that, a woman at the opera, in a long box seat, discreetly adjusting her layers, and using a miniature toilet under her gown. It sounds outrageous today, but back then, it was considered a mark of elegance and preparedness. After all, if public toilets didn't exist, and you couldn't undress in public, what choice did you have? There's even evidence that some women used them in carriages during long rides. The driver up front, no idea what was happening in the back. Just lace, silence, and a hidden Bertaloo. Some people today are shocked by this. Didn't they have shame, they ask? The truth is, they had plenty of shame, but they also had blunders, and eventually, biology beats social etiquette. For the record, men had it easier again. They could use trees, alleys, even walls. Women, they carried their dignity and their toilet and porcelain. Today, you can still find Bertaloos in antique shops. Collectors sometimes mistake them for gravy boats, but once you know what they really are, you'll never look at them the same way again. And speaking of going out in public, why did Victorian women never go to the bathroom alone? That's no coincidence. Let's lift the veil on an old mystery. You've probably heard the joke. Why do women always go to the bathroom in pairs? It's one of those age-old social observations people make without knowing the roots. But in the Victorian era, it wasn't a social habit. It was a necessity. Because using the toilet while wearing a steel-reinforced cage of fabric, something you could do alone. Let's imagine the situation. You're at a friend's house for tea. You feel the urge to go. You excuse yourself discreetly, never saying toilet. Of course. Maybe I must freshen up, or I need a moment. Now begins the ordeal. You lift your skirt. But it's not just one skirt. It's 3 layers of petticoats, plus the overskirt, and maybe even a bustle. You can't hold it all up and balance yourself at the same time, so what do? You ask a friend or your maid to come with you. One would help gather the layers, hold them away from the chamber pot or another might hand you a cloth afterward or help you readjust your corset ties if they shifted. Sometimes the chamber pot was placed in a small closet or hidden alcove in a drawing room. Even there, a woman might need someone to stand guard. Outside, not just for safety, but to ensure her modesty remained intact. For upper-class ladies, going with a maid was normal. But among friends, the experience became something else. A moment of shared vulnerability. It was a time to exchange whispers, giggle at the ridiculousness of their clothing, or vent about cramps and corsets. In a society that forbade women from talking about their bodies, these moments became little islands of honesty, and over time, this ritual women going together became normalized, expected, even comforting. You could trust another woman to not judge you, to hold your dress and your dignity at the same time. And so, the idea of bathroom sisterhood was born not from trend, but from survival. Even today, that legacy lingers. It's easy to forget how much of our behavior has roots in very real, very physical challenges of the past. So the next time you see women head to the restroom together, remember, they're not being dramatic. They're reenacting a ritual that once meant the difference between dignity and disaster. But not everyone had a helpful friend or maid by their side. What about when women were home, alone, in the middle of the night? That's where the humble chamber pot entered the scene. Imagine, it's 2 a.m. in a Victorian bedroom. The fireplace has long gone cold. Your corset is loosened, but still laced. Outside, darkness, cold wind, and likely no indoor plumbing. And yet, nature calls. So what did you do? You reached for the chamber pot, a humble object, but an essential one. Tucked discreetly under the bed or inside a wooden cabinet. The chamber pot was your midnight savior. These ceramic or metal bowls weren't glamorous, but they were effective. They sat in every respectable home, in bedrooms, dressing rooms, even nurseries. Sometimes painted, sometimes plain, often with lids, to reduce odor and embarrassment. For women, the nighttime routine was a mix of practicality and awkward choreography. Swing your legs off the bed, careful not to knock over candles. Lift your nightgown. Kneel slightly over the pot. No need to remove drawers, thanks to the open crotch. You'd aim, balance, and try not to make too much noise, because being heard was as embarrassing as being seen. Some chamber pots were placed inside wooden furniture called commodes. They looked like chairs, but had a hidden hole. Sit, relieve yourself, close the lid. Very proper, very discreet. And what about afterward? If you were wealthy, your maid would empty the pot. In the morning, she'd pour the contents into a larger container or pit toilet, then wash the vessel carefully. If you were poor, you did it yourself, carrying it outside, hoping no one saw you with it. Some homes had slop jars. Larger vessels where chamber pots were emptied communally. These had to be dumped daily. In city slums, people tossed waste into gutters and alleyways, sometimes from windows. You've heard the stories, Gardy Lou. They'd shout in 19th century Edinburgh, warning pedestrians below before dumping urine onto the street. Yes, that really happened. But for Victorian women, especially those of means, the chamber pot was a way to maintain control. It spared them from the cold, the shame of wandering the house, and the dangers of outdoor toilets. Because remember, going outside at night wasn't safe. Gas lamps were dim, streets were muddy, and for women, walking alone in the dark was always a risk. So the chamber pot wasn't just a bathroom solution, it was a symbol of self-protection, of course. It wasn't very comfortable, or clean, or quiet, but it was better than nothing, and in the morning, you'd pull on your corset again, tighten the laces, stack the petticoats, brush your hair, and start another day of pretending your body didn't need anything as unladylike as relief. But behind the scenes, someone always helped keep things running smoothly. Let's talk about the silent hero of every upper-class lady's bathroom routine. The chamber pot by the bed. Midnight necessities. The middle of the night in a Victorian home. There's no indoor plumbing, no electric light, and certainly no modern bathroom. So what did women do when they had to relieve themselves? They turned to the chamber pot, a ceramic or metal bowl placed under the bed or inside a wooden cabinet. Discreet, humble, and absolutely essential. A woman would quietly lift her nightgown, squat slightly over the pot, no need to remove her split drawers, and do her business. If she had a maid, it would be emptied and cleaned in the morning. If not, she had to carry it out herself, hoping no one noticed. Some pots were hidden inside commodes, which looked like chairs but had a secret hole inside. Practical, yes, but not exactly glamorous. Still, it beat walking outside in the cold, risking your safety just to find an outhouse. The chamber pot may not seem like much today, but back then, it was a symbol of comfort, modesty, and survival. Maid. How maids helped with the bathroom routine for upper-class Victorian women. Using the bathroom wasn't a solo task. They had helpmaids who understood every layer of their mistress's wardrobe. Need to lift 5 petticoats, unlace a corset, clean a chamber pot. That was the maid's job. They assisted discreetly, silently helping their mistresses stay ladylike. Even during the most human moments, it wasn't glamorous work. But without them, those elegant routines would have fallen apart, quite literally. For the wealthy, the bathroom struggle was hidden behind silk and servants. For the poor, it was raw, public, and brutal. Working-class women lived in crowded homes, no private chamber pots, no maids, no indoor plumbing. They shared filthy outhouses with neighbors. If they were lucky, many relieved themselves in buckets, alleys, even behind factory buildings. And yet, society judged them for being unclean, without offering a single clean option. Hygiene was a privilege, dignity even more so. Periods were worse. The silent struggle. Victorian women bled in silence. There were no pads, no tampons, no pain relief. Just homemade cloth rags, awkward belts, and secret washes. Everything had to be hidden, soaked, boiled, and reused again and again. They couldn't talk about cramps or leaks. Even mentioning menstruation was socially forbidden. So, women endured in silence, stoic, composed, and aching. It wasn't just a secret, it was a monthly battle in layers of linen and shame. No toilet paper. No problem. Toilet paper. Not yet. Victorian women had to get creative. They used scraps of newspaper, bits of fabric, moss, or lace cloths washed and reused. It wasn't soft. It wasn't comfortable, but it worked. The wealthy had fine linens for the task. The poor, whatever they could find. There were no rolls, no flush, just improvisation, shame, and silence. Cleanliness came at a cost, but women paid it quietly, daily. Smell and shame in Victorian society. Smelling bad was a moral failure, especially for women, but without plumbing, daily baths, or deodorant, staying fresh was nearly impossible. So they layered on perfumes and powders, hoping to mask the odors beneath. To sweat, to smell, to be human. That was considered shameful. So women carried scented handkerchiefs, not just to breathe through, but to hide the truth. They weren't just masking their bodies, they were masking the reality they were never allowed to speak. Bathroom etiquette, say anything but toilet in Victorian society. You never said toilet. It was too crude, too physical. A proper lady said, "I need to retire, I'm going to the powder room," or simply, "Excuse me." The goal was to pretend bodily needs didn't exist. Even the word leg was considered impolite. They said limb. So if you had to go, you had to go, without ever saying it. When plumbing arrived, not everyone trusted it. When indoor plumbing finally arrived in the late 1800s, you'd think people celebrated, but many didn't. Some thought flushing toilets were dangerous, that sewer gases would leak into homes and cause disease. Others believed toilets inside the house were immoral, too close to living spaces. Even Queen Victoria was hesitant about modern bathrooms. So despite the invention, many women still used chamber pots by habit, by fear, or by modesty. Progress knocked, but tradition held. The door closed. Bathroom time limits and social pressure. In the Victorian world, even bathroom time was judged. "Take too long," people whispered. "What were you doing?" Why so slow? Women were expected to be quick, quiet, invisible, no noises, no smells, no reminders that they had normal bodily functions. Every trip to the toilet came with social anxiety. It wasn't just about relieving yourself. It was about protecting your reputation. In the Victorian era, even the act of peeing came with pressure. Troubles, no toilets on the road. Traveling in the Victorian era. For women, it was a nightmare. There were no public rest stops, no train toilets in early carriages, and no guarantee of privacy, so women held it in for hours, sometimes days, or used portable urinals like the Bertaloo hidden beneath skirts. Carriages had no stops, roads were long, and society said, a proper lady never shows discomfort. So they smiled, sat straight, and prayed their bladder would behave. Behind every trip, a silent struggle. When accidents happened, the unspoken horror of with all their planning. Sometimes, it happened. A leak, a stain, a smell. And in Victorian society, that wasn't just embarrassing, it was humiliating. Women were judged harshly for bodily accidents. One slip, and you were labeled unclean. Or worse, hysterical. So they carried extra cloths, scented sachets, and layers to hide stains. And if an accident did occur, they said nothing. They suffered in silence, prayed no one noticed, and changed in secret. Because in that world, even biology could ruin your reputation. The double standard, men versus women. Men had it easy. They could pee against a wall, use a street urinal, step behind a tree. No layers, no shame, no judgment. Women, they needed privacy, silence, and a maze of fabric navigations just to relieve themselves. Men's needs were expected. Women's were hidden. Even in the most basic human functions, one gender got convenience, the other got corsets, whispers, and porcelain secrets. It wasn't just unfair. It was a system built on denying women their bodies, the quiet rebellion, dignity in the shadows. They didn't march in the streets. They didn't burn corsets yet, but Victorian women waged a rebellion every day, quietly, beneath the skirts. Every time they lifted layers in secret, used a chamber pot in silence, held their bladder through a public outing, shared a knowing glance with a friend in the powder room that was resistance. Society told them to be delicate, silent, scented, pure, to never speak of pain, to pretend their bodies didn't bleed, didn't ache, didn't need, but they found a way. With hidden pots, with coded language, with trusted hands holding back crinolines, they preserved dignity in the dark. They taught daughters the tricks, helped friends behind locked doors, laughed quietly at the absurdity, even while enduring it. And so, in corsets and petticoats, women did what they've always done. They adapted, they endured, and they refused to let shame define them. Because, in a world that tried to silence their bodies, they still answered nature's call. And that was a revolution in ribbons and steel.